Kicked-out mother struggles on the streets, but something happens that makes her rich. Dear viewers, welcome to our channel. Subscribe to receive more stories every day. The rain pounded the streets of the small town as Emma stood on the front porch, suitcase in hand, and her son, Ben, holding tightly to her leg. The door slammed shut behind her, the finality of it echoing in her chest. Tom, her husband of 8 years, stood on the other side of that door, indifferent to the devastation he had caused. "You're not welcome here anymore, Emma," he had said moments before. "I'm done. Found someone new. You should have seen this coming." Her heart shattered, but the words stuck in her throat. Tom had always been cold, but this cruelty felt like a new low. She couldn't argue, though. He'd made up his mind. The truth was, their marriage had been a slow unraveling for years. What began as small arguments over bills and their son turned into bitter fights about everything from finances to Tom's late nights at work. Emma suspected he had been seeing someone else for months, and tonight, that suspicion was confirmed. With nowhere to go and only a small amount of money saved from her part-time job, Emma had no choice but to leave. The rain soaked through her thin coat as she clutched Ben's hand and walked toward the bus stop, the weight of her new reality pressing down on her like a heavy stone. In the dim light of the street lamps, Emma thought back to the days when things were good. When she and Tom had met, he was charming, successful, and made her feel like the most important person in the world. But after they got married, things changed. Tom's business grew, and with it, so did his ego. He started treating her more like an accessory than a partner. Their son Ben was her only light, and as they sat shivering at the bus stop, Emma vowed to protect him at all costs. The next few months were a blur of desperation and survival. Emma and Ben moved into a small, run-down apartment on the outskirts of town, far from the life of luxury they had once known. Emma took on multiple part-time jobs just to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads. She rarely slept, her mind constantly racing with thoughts of how to make ends meet. Ben, despite the upheaval, adapted with the resilience only children seem to possess. He was too young to fully understand the depth of their loss, and Emma tried her best to shield him from the reality of their situation. She knew Tom had moved on with his new girlfriend, someone younger, richer, and far more glamorous than she ever was. The thought gnawed at her, but she refused to let it consume her. She had to stay strong for Ben. One night, after putting Ben to bed, Emma sat at the small kitchen table, counting the last of her money. Rent was due in 2 days, and she was short. She let out a sigh, resting her head in her hands, feeling the tears burn behind her eyes. She couldn't break, not now, not when Ben was depending on her. Suddenly, a small, crumpled lottery ticket on the counter caught her eye. She had bought it a few days ago on a whim, one of those impulsive purchases at the grocery store when the jackpot numbers flashed on the screen. She had forgotten about it entirely. With nothing left to lose, Emma reached for her phone and pulled up the lottery results from the night before. As she scanned the numbers, her heart began to race. 3, 7, 18. 23, 42. The first 5 numbers matched. Her hand shook as she glanced at the final number. 18. Her vision blurred as she stared at the screen in disbelief. She checked the numbers again and again. It couldn't be real, could it? With trembling hands, she looked at the date on the ticket and then back at the screen. It was a match. All of it. Emma had just won the lottery. Her breath caught in her throat, and she nearly collapsed from the shock. Tears streamed down her face as the weight of her struggles lifted, if only for a moment. She had won the jackpot. Millions of dollars were now hers. But as the euphoria started to wear off, reality set in. What did this mean for her and Ben? Could this really be the lifeline they needed to escape the life of hardship they had been living? And what would Tom say if he found out? She knew he would come crawling back the moment he caught wind of her newfound fortune. Emma spent the next few weeks in a daze, carefully plotting her next steps. She didn't tell anyone about her win at first, not even Ben. The money was life-changing, but it also made her cautious. She didn't want to make any hasty decisions that could put her and her son in danger. For years, she had learned to survive by being careful, and this was no different. Instead of making any flashy purchases, Emma quietly hired a financial advisor and began planning a stable future for herself and Ben. She bought a modest home in a quiet neighborhood, far from the prying eyes of the life she had once shared with Tom. She also enrolled Ben in a good school, making sure he had everything he needed for a better future. And while they lived comfortably, Emma still felt the ghosts of the past haunting her. One evening, Emma sat on the couch with Ben, watching a documentary on television. It was about single mothers who had overcome adversity and found success against all odds. The stories resonated deeply with Emma, who felt a kinship with these women. The next day, Emma received a call from a local news station. They had heard about her incredible lottery win and wanted to feature her story in a special segment about ordinary people who had beaten the odds. First, she hesitated. She had tried so hard to keep a low profile, to avoid drawing attention to herself. But something in her heart told her that it was time to share her story. Maybe by doing so, she could help other women who were going through the same struggle she had faced. The day of the interview came, and Emma sat nervously in front of the camera. The interviewer asked her about her journey, how she had gone from being kicked out of her home to winning the lottery. Emma spoke candidly about her experience, the pain of losing her home, and the joy of rebuilding her life for Ben. As the camera rolled, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders, as if sharing her story was the final step in her healing process. Little did she know, this very interview would set the stage for a dramatic confrontation with her past, a past she had thought she had left behind. Emma's interview was a success, far more than she could have ever imagined. Her story resonated deeply with viewers, especially single mothers who found themselves in similar situations of abandonment and hardship. Within days, the video of her interview went viral. Messages poured in from strangers offering congratulations and sharing how inspired they were by her strength and resilience. However, not everyone was pleased with Emma's newfound fame. Tom, sitting in his newly furnished office at the construction firm he had worked so hard to grow, stared at the television screen in disbelief. He had been half watching the news while wrapping up his latest project, but the moment Emma's face appeared, he froze. There she was. His ex-wife, the woman he had kicked out of their home, now glowing with success and happiness. She spoke confidently about her struggles after the divorce, how she had fought for Ben and herself, and then the revelation, she had won the lottery. Tom's jaw clenched as he listened, a wave of shock and anger coursing through him. How could this have happened? As the interview continued, Emma recounted how she had used the last bit of money she had left to buy that fateful lottery ticket, never expecting it to change her life. She spoke of Ben, of the new life she had built for them both. "We're finally happy," she said, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I don't need anything else. I have my son, and that's enough for me." Tom felt the walls closing in around him. The woman he had discarded without a second thought was now living a life of luxury. His life, as far as he was concerned. He had left Emma for a glamorous, wealthy woman, thinking she would elevate his status, but now his new relationship was crumbling. His business had taken several hits in recent months, and financial pressures were mounting. Tom's mind raced. He knew Emma. Deep down she was too kind, too soft-hearted. If he played his cards right, maybe he could worm his way back into her life, claim his share of her newfound wealth. After all, they had shared a life together once, hadn't they? He picked up his phone and made a call. For the next few weeks, Emma tried to adjust to her new life in the spotlight. She received invitations to local charity events, offers to speak at conferences, and even a book deal proposal. For once, she felt like she was in control of her destiny. But there was always a shadow lurking in the back of her mind. A shadow in the shape of Tom. She hadn't heard from him since the divorce, and a part of her wondered if he had seen the interview. But she pushed the thought away, focusing instead on her future with Ben. One afternoon, while Emma was dropping Ben off at school, she felt her phone buzz in her pocket. Glancing down, she saw an unfamiliar number calling. Hesitantly, she answered. "Hello," she asked. "Emma, it's Tom." The sound of his voice sent a chill down her spine. She had braced herself for this moment, But hearing his voice brought back a flood of emotions: anger, hurt, and betrayal. For a brief moment, she was transported back to that night, standing on their doorstep with her suitcase, hearing the door slam behind her. "What do you want, Tom?" she asked, her voice steady but cold. "I saw your interview," he said, his voice smooth. "I just had to reach out. I didn't realize things had gotten so bad for you after we split. I never wanted that for you, Emma." Emma couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "You didn't care then, Tom. Why do you care now?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I made mistakes," he said, his tone contrite. "I let my pride get in the way. I've been thinking a lot about us lately. About Ben. I'd like to see him." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. She knew Tom was up to something. He had never once reached out to see Ben in all the years they had been apart. And now, suddenly, he was interested. She wasn't naive. Tom had seen the money, and now he wanted a piece of it. "Ben doesn't need you, Tom," Emma said firmly. "We're fine without you." "Emma, please," Tom continued, his voice now tinged with desperation. "I just want to talk. Maybe we can work something out. For Ben's sake." Emma took a deep breath, trying to steady her emotions. She had spent years rebuilding her life, brick by brick, without Tom. Letting him back in now would only open old wounds. But she knew one thing for sure. She had the upper hand now, and Tom knew it too. A few days later, Tom showed up unannounced at Emma's door. She stood in the entryway, arms crossed, staring at the man she had once loved. He looked older, more worn down than she remembered. His suit, once immaculate, was rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He was clearly not doing as well as he had pretended to be. "I'm not letting you in," Emma said, blocking the doorway. Tom raised his hands in surrender. "I just want to talk, Emma. Please." Reluctantly, Emma stepped aside, allowing him into the house. They sat at the kitchen table, the tension between them palpable. Tom glanced around at the modest yet comfortable home Emma had made for herself and Ben, clearly trying to suppress his envy. "I've been thinking a lot," Tom began, his voice soft. "I made a mistake when I left you. I thought I wanted something else, but I was wrong. I want to be part of Ben's life. I think we should try to work things out." Emma stared at him, her expression unreadable. "You want to work things out? After everything you put me through?" "I know I messed up," Tom said quickly. "But people change, Emma. Changed. I want us to be a family again." Emma shook her head, letting out a humorless laugh. "You don't want a family, Tom. You want money. You saw that interview, and now you think you can waltz back into my life and take what I've worked for." Tom's face reddened. "That's not true. Care about you. I care about Ben. You didn't care about us when you threw us out on the street," Emma shot back, her voice rising. "You didn't care when I had to work 3 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads. And you certainly didn't care when you found someone else to replace me. You only care now because you're broke, aren't you?" Tom's silence was all the confirmation Emma needed. "You're not getting a dime from me, Tom," Emma said coldly. "Not now, not ever." Tom's expression hardened. "You think you can just cut me out of Ben's life like that? I'm his father, Emma. I have rights." Emma stood up from the table, her heart pounding in her chest. "Get out of my house, Tom." For a moment, Tom hesitated, his face twisted in frustration. Then, without another word, he stood and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. Emma collapsed into the chair, her hands shaking. She had stood her ground, but she knew this wasn't over. Tom would come back, he always did. But this time she was ready. The days after Tom's visit were tense. Emma knew that he wouldn't give up easily. She had spent too many years married to him not to know how his mind worked. He was driven by one thing: greed. The money she had won was all he could see now, and no matter how much she pushed him away, he would find a way to get close again. True to form, Tom began to make his move. Emma started receiving legal notices, custody filings, and requests for mediation. Tom was now claiming that he wanted joint custody of Ben, insisting that as the father, he had a right to be involved in his son's life. It was a calculated attack, and Emma knew that his goal was to drain her emotionally and financially until she had no choice but to give in. Every day, Ben asked her why his father was suddenly trying to come back into their lives. Emma didn't have the heart to tell him the real reason. Instead, she focused on protecting him and their new life together. She hired a lawyer, determined not to let Tom manipulate her again. At first, it seemed like a battle Emma could handle, but the legal process was exhausting. The constant paperwork, the court hearings, the tension. It was all too familiar, a reminder of the control Tom had once exerted over her. There were moments when she doubted herself, moments when she wondered if maybe she should just settle. But then she would look at Ben, the child she had fought so hard to protect, and she knew she had no choice but to keep going. It all came to a head in the courtroom. Emma sat at one end of the long table, her lawyer beside her, while Tom sat across from her, looking smug and self-assured. His lawyer laid out the case. Tom had been deprived of his parental rights, and now that he was in a better position to provide for Ben, it was in the child's best interest to have a relationship with his father. Emma's lawyer fought back, presenting evidence of Tom's neglectful behavior over the years, the financial abandonment, and his lack of involvement in Ben's life since the divorce. But Tom's team countered with a well-rehearsed narrative. Tom had been going through a difficult time. He had made mistakes, but now he was reformed. He was ready to be a father again. The judge listened carefully, occasionally glancing at Emma. She felt the weight of those looks. She was the one who had built a life for Ben, the one who had raised him through every hardship. She had won the lottery, yes, but she had earned her success through sheer will and determination. After hours of testimony and cross-examination, the judge called for a recess. Emma's heart pounded as she waited for the final decision. Her lawyer whispered assurances, but Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Tom had the upper hand. He had played the victim perfectly, and she knew how easily people could be swayed by a well-crafted story. Finally, the judge returned, calling both parties to stand. Emma held her breath. In the matter of custody for the minor child, Ben, the judge began, I have reviewed all the evidence and testimony presented. While the father has made efforts to re-enter his child's life, it is clear that the child's welfare has been consistently maintained by the mother. Emma's heart soared as the judge continued. I see no reason to disrupt the stability that the mother has provided. Full custody will remain with the mother, Emma. Visitation rights for the father will be considered on a case-by-case basis. Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had won. Ben was safe. Tom, however, wasn't finished. As soon as the court was dismissed, Tom stormed out of the room, his face red with anger. Emma gathered her things ready to leave, but as she stepped outside the courthouse, she was confronted by Tom, his face twisted in frustration. This isn't over, Emma, he growled, stepping in front of her. You think you can just cut me out of Ben's life and get away with it? I've already won, Tom, Emma said calmly, trying to maintain her composure. The court ruled in my favor. It's over. Tom sneered. You think this is about Ben? You really don't get it, do you? Emma paused, confusion flickering across her face. What are you talking about? Tom leaned in, his voice low and menacing. I knew you'd win the lottery. Emma froze. The words didn't make sense at first, but as she looked into Tom's eyes, she saw something dark lurking there, something she had never noticed before. What do you mean you knew? She asked, her voice shaking. Tom's grin widened. Remember the day you bought that lottery ticket? I knew exactly what you were doing. I saw you struggling, trying to figure out how to make ends meet. So I helped. Emma's heart pounded in her chest. What are you saying? Tom laughed, the sound cold and bitter. I rigged it, Emma. The ticket wasn't luck. I knew which numbers would win, and I made sure you had the right ticket. I was waiting for the right moment to take it all back. But you left before I could make my move. You ran off with my money. And now you think you're going to live happily ever after. Emma's mind raced, trying to process what she was hearing. It couldn't be true, could it? The ticket had felt like her one stroke of good fortune in an otherwise terrible time. But now, Tom was telling her that even that had been manipulated, that he had orchestrated everything. "No," Emma whispered, shaking her head. "You're lying." Tom's smile faded. "Believe what you want, but I've been watching you. I know how you've spent the money. I know everything." Emma felt sick to her stomach. The money, the new life she had built, it all felt tainted now. Was it all a lie? Had she been nothing more than a pawn in Tom's twisted game? But as Emma stood there, staring at the man who had once controlled every aspect of her life, something inside her snapped. She realized that it didn't matter whether Tom had rigged the lottery or not. She had taken that money and turned it into something real. She had built a life for herself and Ben, one that Tom couldn't take away. "You might have rigged the ticket," Emma said, her voice steady. "But you didn't win." "I did. I'm not the same woman you kicked out of the house all those years ago. You can't control me anymore." Tom's eyes flashed with anger, but Emma stood her ground. "You'll never get your hands on this money," she said firmly. "And you'll never be a part of Ben's life. I'm done with you, Tom. It's over." Without another word, Emma turned and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. For the first time in years she felt free. Truly free. Tom might have tried to manipulate her life, but he had failed. She had won in more ways than one. As she got into her car and drove away, Emma glanced at the rearview mirror, seeing Tom standing alone on the courthouse steps. His plan had failed, and now he had nothing left. But Emma had everything. She had her son, her freedom, and the knowledge that no matter what life threw at her, she had the strength to survive. And this time it was all hers. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. If you like this story, please subscribe to our channel to receive more stories every day. Share with us what you think of this story.